Alright, la gang, j'espère que vous êtes en forme. J'espère que vous êtes en feu. Personnellement, on a eu un événement, ça a été un succès all the way à Québec ouais, comme Ed l'a fait. Exactement. Ça a été vraiment, vraiment, vraiment super cool. J'aurais aimé ça que tout le monde puisse y être, mais bon, on sait que la vie, des fois, ça fait en sorte qu'on on peut pas être là partout. On veut show up le plus, on veut être le plus engagé possible, mais bon, on reste des humains et c'est parfaitement compréhensible. Donc, aujourd'hui, c'est un sujet qu'on a parlé hier, mais je trouvais ça vraiment important qu'on relance ce sujet-là, celui du langage. Parce qu'il y a des gens qui ont été là, il y a des gens qui n'ont pas été là. Puis dans les Rhino Runs, ça va être vraiment une ressource que les gens vont pouvoir réutiliser. Puis la réalité puis la beauté de la chose, c'est que même s'il y a des sujets qui, hier, ont été répétés puis vont probablement être répétés dans le futur, ce qu'on veut aller recréer, ce qu'on veut aller rechercher, c'est vraiment de la récurrence, c'est vraiment de la constance. Puis oui, quand on parle de récurrence puis de constante, on parle de répétition. Okay? Donc, le langage, c'est le sujet d'aujourd'hui. Et c'est extrêmement crucial. On en a fait des tests avec Ed en Alberta. On en a vu encore hier une fois avec Momo qui nous en a parlé. Mais d'avoir toujours des différentes personnes qui nous parlent de différents sujets fait en sorte que justement, on peut accrocher d'une autre manière parce que c'est pas vrai que tout le monde va accrocher sur ma manière de parler. C'est pas vrai que le monde va accrocher toujours sur la manière que Ed, que Nate, que Anna, que Dania. OK? Peu importe la personne, on a tout un langage qui va connecter avec différentes personnes. Donc là, aujourd'hui, nous avons Nate the Great. Nate, I hope you're doing fine. I hope you are ready for the team. And I'm giving you the power right now if you are ready. All right? Boom.
All right. Happy Monday, Election Day in Canada. Make sure you go and vote and make it count, right? Make it count. And I think it's a great time to talk about the subjects that we're talking about because we're going to talk about language. We're going to talk about the power of words, the power of your talk to yourself, and the power of your talk into the world. The power of life and death is in the tongue. Okay, so the power of life and death is in the tongue. Your words determine your trajectory in a day, and it determines your trajectory. I can't even speak English this morning. It determines where you're going to go. So your words and your language determine where you're going to go in a day. And if you don't believe me, I suggest you try to switch something. Try to switch anything in your language and see if it makes a difference for you. I'm going to give you guys an action step at the end of this. That's going to be very, very powerful. It's going to line up with what we're going to talk about today. So the first thing I want to bring up is language. Okay. First thing I want to bring up is language. And so when I'm talking about language, I'm talking about the words that you use in conversation with other people. The words that you use in conversation with other people and the words that you use in conversation with yourself. Because every day, all day, you're talking to yourself. You're either saying good things, you're saying bad things, or you're saying impartial things. But you're saying things to yourself. Most of us are not aware of the things that we're saying. We're just having these conversations, and that's part of the problem. So one of my outcomes for this call today is just to simply bring awareness in to what kind of language that you're using internally, okay? And how that affects the world around you externally. So very, very popular narrative in this day and age is the victim mentality. Very, very easy for it to sneak into our language in subtle ways. And so the victim approach basically says, you know, I'm not responsible. It starts off with saying, I'm not responsible for X, Y, Z. I'm not responsible for this, that, and the other thing that's going on in my life. Well, here's the problem with not being responsible. You may say, well, there's this going on, Nate. Well, there's that going on, Nate. All of this stuff is out of my control. There's vaccine passports, there's restrictions on freedom, there's this and there's that. There's all these things going on in the world that are not my fault and they're limiting me. So how am I responsible, right? So how am I going to shift my language and actually believe it? Because I don't want you just to shift your language. I want you to actually believe this. It's because here's the simple point is if you switch your language and you say, I am responsible for where I'm at, I am responsible for the world I live in, guess what happens? You get the power back in your life. So if you switch your language, you switch the power source. So if you're saying I'm not responsible all the time and you're blaming this, you're blaming the government, you're blaming, society. I don't even know. I'm just giving examples. I'm not trying to politicize anybody or whatever kind of end of the spectrum you're on. You have to understand that if you take responsibility, then you're also taking the power back in your own life. And so if your language reflects, I'm responsible. So if you start with, I am responsible for where I'm at, rather than I am not responsible for where I'm at, you have an advantage over everybody in the world. And the advantage is because you take responsibility, because that's your internal dialogue, you actually get to choose where you go next. Okay? Most people, if you're not responsible and you're a victim mindset and you're using that language, you are at the mercy of circumstance. So you go down when everybody tells you to go down, you go up when everyone tells you to go up, and you never really get to live your full potential. And it all starts with your language. How can you possibly go somewhere and talk somewhere else? So how can you possibly take responsibility for your life, go in a positive direction if you're using negative self-talk? It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. That would mean you're a liar and you're dishonest. Okay? So if you're saying I'm not responsible, but then you're taking responsibility, you're not being honest with yourself. Okay? So Jordan Peterson, he always talks about telling the truth. This is what he means by that, is becoming aware of the internal dialogue and being honest with yourself about it, and then lining your life up with what you're saying. So you want to give yourself the power back. And here's the cool thing is when you take responsibility, this is a crazy part of it. When you start taking responsibility, you actually empower other people to do the same thing. And I did a little presentation last night. We did some talking in front of a group of business people. And I encourage the very successful people in the room, like multi-millionaires. And I challenged everybody in that meeting, lots of people, probably a couple hundred people there, and all business leaders, politicians, stuff like that. I challenged them to elevate the room when they walk in. I challenged them to change their language, the same thing we're talking about today, which is cool that this was the topic. And that I challenged these guys that were like really successful guys to elevate the room, right? And we have to elevate the room that when we walk in, and the way we do that is with our language. You ever be around someone that just complains all the time? And is victim mindset, and here's the thing about that is that becomes contagious, right? It becomes kind of like, because I think our default mode is to complain. Our default mode is to just, we like that negativity a little bit. So we love to join in with them, right? And so we join in, and you know what? You can look for a lot of things and find them to complain about in this day and age, right? And you don't have to look very far, right? You don't have to look very far. You can find 100 things to talk about that's negative. But what happens when you do that is you bring yourself down and you bring other people down, and you don't elevate the room. You don't, you actually disempower the room, right? It doesn't matter where you're at. Like, this is where people have limiting beliefs in themselves, right? You think that just because, you're so-and-so that you can't really influence the room. Well, we always tell you that your presence matters. We always tell you that, you showing up is 90% of it. And the fact is, it doesn't matter who you are or where you come from or what kind of limitations that you've placed on yourself. The language that you use can either build up the people around you or bring them down. And the difference between successful people, if you spend time around people that are really successful, is they don't like to spend a lot of time talking about negative things, right? And I've talked to successful people in many different businesses, many different types of businesses, even and prove it as well. And the thing that you get when you hang around with the winners is you get winning talk. Okay, you don't spend a lot of time in the weeds complaining about the world, you know, blaming, shaming, and justifying. Right? That's the loser language we talk about and prove it all the time. Blaming, shaming, and justifying is not where we want to be, right? It's like a virus. We talk about viruses, right? We talk about viruses, and complaining and negativity is like a virus. And in this business, you want to create a positive virus. You want to create a virus of love and appreciation. We talked about this last night too, like creating an environment where people feel loved and appreciated regardless of their level of achievement or desire. How do you do that? You use winning language. You use positive talk. Okay? You can't create an environment, and that's the kind of environment that grows leaders, by the way, is the where you create an environment around you where people feel loved and appreciated regardless of their level of achievement or desire, because then guess what happens? The responsibility comes back to you, right? And them spending time associating with you can help them to raise their thinking, raise their awareness level. So maybe they can see something they didn't see before, and maybe their level of desire changes. Maybe they want to grow themselves. Maybe they start getting inspired to do more, be more, and achieve more. But you can only do that if you're taking responsibility for your own language. Okay. I want to show you where it starts. Okay. Because a lot of times when we're talking about this stuff, we're thinking about other people. We're thinking about the impact we're trying to make. We're thinking about the people we're trying to sell ketones to or attract them to this conversation. We're trying to think of, how do I motivate my team? How do I motivate people in my... I want to show you where it starts. Okay? I want to show you where it starts. It starts with the dialogue that's going on in the inside of yourself. Okay? And I talked about this, I touched on it just a couple seconds ago, and it's like, so like you're one of these people, right, that shows up on a call and you think, you know, I can complain because I'm not that influential. I'm not a Mick. I'm not an Emily. You know, I'm not an Abigail. So, you know, what I say doesn't matter. You may not even think that out loud, but deep down inside, you believe it because of your posture, because of how you show up, because you got this thing on the inside of you that's telling yourself that you're not enough. Okay? And we all get that way a little bit sometimes, right? We all have that little thing that pops in, and it's not very loud. It's just this kind of, I mean, I get it sometimes, guys. I get it sometimes. I get this little self-doubt thing that creeps in just a little bit, right? Just a little bit. And it's so small that I can almost ignore it, but it affects the way I show up sometimes. But here's what I do differently than I used to do before is I'm aware of it. Okay? And so the first thing that you have to do is become very aware of the conversation that you're having on the inside of yourself, because you're having one. So one of the keys that you're not aware is if you say to yourself, well, what conversation, Nate? What conversation? I don't even know what I'm thinking right now. So if you don't know, that's a key that you need to check in with yourself. This is where you need to unplug. This is where you need to get quiet. This is where you need to get mindful, and you need to check in with yourself. And if you feel like things are not, if your outcomes are not lining up, I would check in with yourself first. See what kind of conversation that you're telling yourself. And a lot of times these conversations, these internal dialogues, they start off in childhood, something that happened as a kid. It's a pattern that's been ingrained in your life, right? Maybe you were told by your father that you weren't good enough. Maybe you were told by a coach that you could never measure up. Maybe you weren't that good in school and you struggled. Maybe you're abused as a kid. I don't know what it is, that started this thought process, but you need to become aware of it so that you can start shifting the conversation and therefore shifting the trajectory of your life. Right? Because so many of us get caught in these patterns, right? That we've been in our whole lives. And one of the keys to this business is breaking out of those patterns. And one of the keys to breaking out of the patterns is watching what you say, watching the internal dialogue. Okay? It's so easy in this world. We like to look at, there's a huge movement online of compassion, right? Where people are compassionate about, starving kids overseas. We're compassionate about, different cultures. We're compassionate about, being in a tolerant and loving society. We're compassionate about all these things, but we sometimes forget about ourselves, right? Some of you on here would be more quick to forgive somebody else, be kind to someone else than you would yourself. You think that being kind to yourself is being excessive, extravagant, maybe you don't want it. I used to have a tough time accepting a compliment. I could sit in a room with a guy like Mick and I could let him tell me all the things that I need to develop in my life and work on the negative things. But I would feel uncomfortable taking a compliment. I'd feel uncomfortable just sitting on it. I would like to make a joke about it, or I'd laugh about it, or I would deflect with a little bit of humor, right? Pay attention to how you take compliments from other people. That could give you a clue to how you take compliments from yourself. It's okay to compliment yourself. Have you made a list? So here's a little exercise that you can do, is make a list of your strengths. Make a list of your advantages. One of the keys to solving any kind of problem, whatever it is, it could be a relational problem, it could be a business problem, it could be a life problem, is making a list of your advantages going into it. What are your advantages? What are the things that you have overcome in your life that sets you apart from other people? And maybe some of you guys are so ingrained in negative self-talk that you don't even know your qualities. So I encourage you to ask some people, ask a coach, ask somebody that you trust or care about, what are some of my advantages? What are some of the, and now, like some of you guys, I can tell, like just based on the vibration that would make you uncomfortable, is to ask somebody, what am I good at? What am I good at? What am I amazing at? What part of me is awesome? We talk a lot. We talk a good game when it comes to being kind to yourself and treating yourself good. But I don't know if actually we really understand what that means sometimes. I don't know if we really get it. And so there's a toxic kind of counterfeit to this too in our day and age, and it lines up with the victim, right? And there's people that say treat yourself, take care of you, and they think that means you get to ignore the world around you. They think that means that you get to leave some of your responsibilities behind because you're just taking care of yourself. I'm taking care of me. I'm doing this for my own happiness, kind of thing. But what that fails to see is that none of this happens in a vacuum. Okay, none of this happens in a vacuum. And so your own self is tied up with a community, right? Your own self is tied up with your family. It's tied up with the people that you're around. And so many times when we pull ourselves back from the people around us, it's actually because we haven't dealt with the issue on the inside yet. So there's a very toxic counterfeit to this, and you got to be careful with that one that says, I'm going to do what's best for me. I'm going to treat myself good at the expense of somebody else. And usually that doesn't happen. Usually what happens is when you're actually loving yourself, you start doing all the things that we talked about at the beginning. You actually start elevating people around you. You actually start making a positive influence in your family, in your career, in your business, right? You start doing all those things. And so it does, if you're pushing people away, you may not be doing this right. Okay, so be careful with that, because there's a lot of people, a lot of you see influencers and stuff online saying, you got to treat yourself good. I just, whatever. I let go of some of my responsibilities and I piss some people off. You might piss some people off, but just pay attention to how that goes. If they're people you care about, you should probably elevate them as you're going through this process. So you want to make sure that your language is empowering. You want to, first of all, be aware of what you're saying to yourself, okay? You want to be aware of what you are saying to other people, okay? And you cannot have the luxury, if you want to be successful in life, in business, in relationships, if you want to be successful, you cannot afford to have the luxury of talking like everybody else. You can't talk like everybody else and be part of the top 5%. Okay? You can't talk like everyone else if you want a top 5% marriage, if you want a top 5% family, if you want a top 5% relationship, if you want a top 5% business, you cannot talk like everybody else. Okay, you can't talk like everybody else to each other, and you can't talk like everyone else to yourself. You give up that luxury if you want what the top 5% have. You give up that luxury. Okay, we can't go there. We can't do the same thing, because we're after something better here. We want to live a better life. We want to grow. We want to rise above. We want to elevate people in the room. We want to elevate the world that we live in, elevate the community that we're in. We want to elevate them by using our language properly. So we don't have the luxury to do what other people do. It's everywhere. Be careful. It's on both ends of political spectrums. People just love to complain. One practical tip, and I'm going to stop here because I think we've opened up a whole bunch of things, is that never bring up a problem without bringing up a solution. It's okay to bring up a problem even with yourself, right? It's okay, because if you actually love yourself, you're going to be honest with yourself if you have a flaw that you need to work on. But don't just leave it at that, because then that becomes condemnation, and you can carry some toxic guilt, some toxic shame for some of your flaws. And what you need to do is bring a solution with it. So if you're going to bring a problem to your team, if you're going to bring a problem to yourself, then you need to bring a solution with it. And I think Mick, we were doing some kind of exercise in Banff, and he's like, I have a hard time doing this exercise because I can't bring up the problem without a solution. That's where we want to be, okay? We want to be in a place where even if someone said, hey, just show me the problem, don't bring a solution, that it's so hard, because instantly we've trained ourselves, right, to pair that problem with a solution. All right, so I'm going to leave it at that, because I think we unpacked a whole bunch of stuff there, lots to think about. You guys have had a great weekend, looks like. So anyway, I'll leave it at that. I'll let you recap, Mick, and then we can do some questions if there is any.
I really, really love it, especially the last 2 points. Were really hardcore golden nugget. You give the luxury. I will say it in French just after, but now I'm more talking to you, Nate, than to anybody. You give the luxury to be normal and to have normal talk when you want to have success. And I really love that, because I'm listening to the series. I don't know if you know Billion.
Yeah.
They exactly had that conversation.
Oh, really?
That was looking yesterday. So it's really nice. Like, you really want to have success, yes. So you give up the luxury of spending your Friday and your Saturday and your Sunday night with friends, taking some alcohol. You give up basically the normal thing in your life to become exceptional, and this is what difference people with a lot of success and with people with a little bit of success. You basically sacrifice the part of yourself that um, that is mediocre. Let's put it that way. So it's not about shaming. It's not about justifying stuff like that. Like, I'm doing a lot of normal stuff that I'm trying to get a little bit away in my life. But I guess we're still human, and I guess we enjoy life too much sometimes, which is not necessarily a bad thing, right? So it's always about confrontation like that. And the other, it's really true. All the fucking time, the more you spend time in a problem, the less you will find the solution, right? So that point was really, really powerful for me. And at some point in my own life, I'm I'm basically triggered by people just putting out the problem. It's never about the problem, because it's really easy to get stuck in, like, okay, that's doesn't work, that doesn't work, that doesn't work. But yeah, but what are you actually doing to get it better, to get it working? And a lot of people are in the bitching, moaning, and justifying, like you said. So those 2 points, it's all the fucking time about the solution, and it's never about bringing up a problem. So no problem. There's never any problem. There's always talk about solutions to get better. I really, really, really enjoy those. So je vais parler un petit peu en français pour faire le récapitulatif. Là, c'était vraiment ces points-là m'ont pogné directement au cœur, si je peux dire. C'est pour ça que je vais les mentionner à Nate pour qu'ils me comprennent à 100%. C'est comme des petites golden nuggets dans ma vie. Donc, ce que Nate nous a parlé depuis dans la dernière demi-heure, c'est à partir du moment où vous êtes conscient de votre langage interne. C'est un petit peu le même principe que Camille a parlé hier ici pour ceux qui étaient là. À partir du moment où c'est que vous êtes conscient de votre langage interne, puis c'est pas de l'extérieur vers l'intérieur, c'est de l'intérieur vers l'extérieur. À partir du moment où vous en êtes conscient, vous pouvez reprogrammer votre subconscient. Ça va prendre du temps, ça va prendre de l'énergie, puis un petit peu comme je l'ai dit, c'est pas normal de faire ça. Donc les autres vont vous dire que ce n'est pas normal, ils vont vous le faire sentir et vont probablement y résister. Okay? Mais résistez jamais. En fait, résistez toujours à cette résistance-là, parce qu'au bout du compte, la majorité du temps, les gens qui vont essayer de nous rabaisser n'ont jamais accompli ce que nous, on essaie d'accomplir. Donc, au bout du compte, ils restent dans des patterns de langage normal dans la tête. Donc, commencez par être responsable de votre dialogue. Commencez à partir du moment où vous êtes conscient. Soyez-en responsable, puis jugez-vous pas pour ça. Jugez-vous pas. It is what it is. Si vous avez ce dialogue-là, c'est votre thermomètre, encore une fois, qui vous indique, oh, j'ai une place à l'amélioration. All right, j'ai quelque chose à améliorer dans ma vie. J'ai une solution à trouver pour devenir meilleur. Donc ça, c'était vraiment le premier point. Après, en être conscient, puis être conscient que ça part de l'intérieur de notre subconscient, justement, ben, vous êtes capable de prendre la responsabilité pour le faire. Et si vous prenez la responsabilité pour le faire, vous allez dire la vérité à propos. Vous allez vous dire la vérité à propos de vous-même. Et à partir d'un certain moment, vous allez commencer à dire la vérité aux personnes autour de vous. Puis ça va faire une super grosse différence, parce que ça va devenir une espèce de réplication. L'honnêteté va se répliquer. C'est pas mal plus facile de se faire dire notre vérité en quelques secondes que quelqu'un qui va prendre des semaines, qui va prendre des mois, puis finalement, on va toujours devoir assumer. Okay? Donc, si jamais vous n'attirez pas la vérité, si jamais vous n'attirez pas les gens qui, à la limite, qui vous critiquent, c'est peut-être parce que, justement, vous n'êtes peut-être pas honnête ou authentique envers vous-même. Okay? Donc, moi, à tous les jours, à toutes les semaines, je demande aux gens autour de moi, avec Camille, avec même probablement qu'Émilie m'a déjà dit mes 4 vérités, puis des choses comme ça. Puis honnêtement, c'est fine. Il faut le faire, parce qu'à partir de ce moment-là, sinon, c'est notre ego, puis on se pense parfait. Puis à partir du moment où on se pense parfait, il n'y a rien qui va marcher. Donc, le langage est contagieux. À toutes les fois que vous bitcher. Peut-être que vous avez raison. Mais est-ce que ça a de l'importance d'avoir raison là-dedans? Non. À partir du moment où c'est vous bitchez, bitching, moaning and justifying, à toutes les fois que vous vous justifiez avec un mais, des choses comme ça, vous répliquez cette espèce de contagion-là. Comme Nate l'a dit, c'est une espèce de virus. À partir du moment où vous le faites, vous l'autorisez dans votre vie. Puis plus vous bitchez, moins vous passez de temps, encore une fois, à trouver la solution. Plus vous bitchez, est-ce que, marquez-moi ça dans les commentaires, si vous bitchez, là, est-ce que vous élevez la salle dans laquelle vous vous trouvez? Oui ou non? La réponse, je ne vais même pas dire non. OK? Crissement non. Vous créez un vortex négatif. Y a-t-il du monde qui veut attirer ce vortex-là dans leur vie? Pas moi, en tout cas. Fait que, soyez juste conscient de votre langage, des cohérences et des incohérences dans votre langage. Encore une fois, là, vous n'êtes pas là pour vous juger. Vous êtes là pour, OK, je fais ça. Comment est-ce que je peux faire pour m'améliorer? Il n'y a rien d'autre à faire avec un problème que de le soulever pour en être conscient. Il n'y a pas de conversation à avoir autour d'un problème. Il y a une conversation à avoir autour d'une solution. Les gens qui ont du succès, comme Nate l'a dit, ont des conversations de winner. Okay? Des winning talk. À partir du moment où vous voulez gagner, réfléchissez à l'énergie que vous mettez dans une pièce. Est-ce que vous mettez l'énergie d'un gagnant ou vous mettez l'énergie d'une victime? Parce que vous ne pouvez pas être les deux. La victime, là, peut-être qu'elle peut gagner une fois, mais sur le long terme, c'est bien rare qu'elle va avoir cette espèce de constance-là à gagner. Okay? Et le dernier point que j'avais pris en tête, je l'ai dit en anglais, puis je le redis en français, là. Qui ici veut être normal à main levée? Je vois pas. Je vois juste Nate présentement. OK. Mais j'espère qu'il n'y a pas personne qui a levé sa main. Qui ici, puis là, je vais regarder pour vrai, parce que ce n'était pas important, qui voulait être normal, qui ici veut être exceptionnel? À main levée. Oh, Dania qui va être exceptionnel, Ed qui va être exceptionnel, Pascal, gardez votre main levée. Marie-Claude, parfait. Numéro 1, Nancy, Brigitte, Alba, parfait. Karine, numéro 1. Alors, commencez à avoir des conversations exceptionnelles. Puis exceptionnel, c'est pas compliqué. C'est pas d'avoir des conversations, de parler de théorie d'Albert Einstein. C'est d'avoir des conversations qui influencent les gens 7 jours sur 7 années, à l'infini, pour le reste de notre vie. So, all right, I will stop the recording, and I hope you like it. And the call to action, I took your call to action, and I just flipped it a little bit down 10 of my strength, 10 of just words, quality, value, whatever, 10 things in my life that can empower other people around. Like, I'm powerful, I'm showing up, I'm adaptable, I'm energetic, I'm magnetic, I'm smart, I'm visionary, I'm empathy. How do you say that in English? Like, I just said my empathy. My empathy, this word. I'm open, I'm virtuous. Potatoes, exactly. So just write down a couple of things, and just by the fact that you write some word, it will reflect on you. So the call to action, just write 10 words that represent yourself, that are empowering you and will empowering other people. So I'm stopping the recording. Boom.